Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to Guide London, which is part of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides. My name's Fiona Lukas, and I'm one of about 600 or so blue badge tourist guides here in London, and we are mostly at the moment guiding from home, which means both doing these broadcasts, but also increasingly now leading virtual tours. And there are more and more of us at the moment getting up and running with virtual tours on all sorts of different topics, whether it be a museum or a particular gallery or an area of London, or perhaps a much more themed kind of topic, which covers quite a way across London. So we'll have a lot more information at the end. If you want to get involved with a virtual tour, if you're interested in coming and booking a date for a tour, we'll tell you all about how to do that later on. For the moment, today's broadcast, we're going royal. And if you've been watching these broadcasts, we're now on to, this is the beginning of our 12th week of broadcasting 3 times a week, 4 o'clock on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. If you've been watching from quite early on, about 2-3 weeks into our broadcasts, we had one celebrating the Queen's birthday. Now, the Queen has 2 birthdays every year. She gets her proper birthday and her official birthday. And this weekend, Saturday, was her official birthday, which she celebrated at Windsor Castle with a slightly smaller scale celebration than normal, a scaled down version of the Trooping of the Colour. But we thought we would talk Royal London today. So we have 2 fabulous presenters. We have Danielle Harte, who is going to be telling us all about the Trooping of the Colour and the changing of the guard, the big ceremonial pomp and ceremony that we have going on in London throughout the year. And then also Sophie, hello, Sophie, who is taking us on a tour around the Crown Estate, which is I was going to say a little patch of land. It's not. It's a great big patch of land. If we walked it, it would turn out to be quite a long walk. But she'll be telling us all about the Crown Estate, this patch of area of land that's sort of royal and actually takes up quite a chunk of the West End. So hello to both of you properly. And Dani, last time we spoke, you passed the exams, you were qualified, you're all ready to go, but you didn't physically have the badge. So just very exciting to see you're now wearing your blue badge, looking nice and shiny and new. And we were just noticing earlier on that we've all gone for the necklace style. Quite a lot of bad guides do wear them pinned onto clothing, but all 3 of us today sporting them as necklaces. Mine's not normally quite so much of a choker. It's a bit lower down, and I'm just trying to fit it into the screen. But before you get going, we do like to know where you're watching us from, and if you have any questions and things for either of the presenters today, then do please put them in the comment section, and we would love to hear from you. Where you are in the world is always good to know as well. So that would be great. And without further ado, Dani and I will disappear, and we will leave Sophie to get started. Oh, Dani. Oh, let's try again.
Thanks. I'm here. Thank you so much, Fiona. And hello, everybody. And thanks very much for coming to have a listen, really, to the story of rather an extraordinary, gigantic piece of land. I hope Fiona doesn't try to walk it, because she'll be walking for the rest of her life. I want to talk about the Crown Estate, and many Brits will vaguely know about the Crown Estate, certainly have heard of it. I think many visitors will have seen logos or perhaps caught a mention of it. But the Crown Estate, you might think, would be totally simple. Well, it's land that belongs to the Queen, right? Well, nothing in this country is that simple. So this slideshow is really to tell you a little bit more about it and how it came to be the way it is. So if we could start off, Fiona. The Crown Estate, it won't surprise you to know that it includes Windsor Great Park, and this is a magnificent view down the Long Walk. And anyone who watched Harry and Meghan's wedding will have seen them coming down here in their carriage, and it goes to Windsor Castle beyond. And then we also have if we could move to the next slide, yeah. So you've got Ascot Racecourse, and basically over 250,000 acres of different farms, and those could be little tiny Welsh hill farms, or they could be enormous arable farms in the east of England. And then if we go to shopping centres, large shopping developments, and quite often lots of land around them, which in some cases has become nature reserves. So a really, really variegated portfolio. And we'll just have a look at this one, which is Portland Bill. And Portland Bill is a little spit of land that sticks off the south coast of England in a county called Dorset. You can say the lighthouse there. But this has 13 quarries on it, and they're famous for a type of very white stone called Portland stone, and you see a lot of this in London. And finally, we'll have a look at a little map. And they've got a very good website, the Crown Estate, and there's an excellent interactive map. And this gives you an idea of the extent of their portfolio. Now, they also do have properties in Scotland, but that's a separate organisation since 2017. So what we've got here, if you look, they have property in the sea. How does that happen? So the Crown Estate also owns 12 miles, nautical miles off the coast of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. They own the seabed. They also own the foreshore, in other words, the beach from the low tide mark to the high tide mark, the mean low tide to the mean high tide. And so you have to, for example, purchase a license off them if you want to collect seaweed that you're going to sell for commercial purposes. They work with dredging companies. They work with aggregate companies. They work with 30 different wind farms. So a lot of renewables coming into the mix. And so this whole portfolio is basically worth £14.3 billion. And of that, about 13 billion is property. And who owns it? Well, headlines like this are why people get really confused, because it says the Queen, this is a quite an accurate piece, but the headline suggests that the Queen owns all this land. Now, the Queen does not own the Crown Estate in a private capacity. The monarch basically is the legal owner of the Crown Estate in the right of the Crown. And the Crown, it's important to remember, is not just the monarch. The Crown is also the executive and the judiciary. And so quite often when you hear people referring to Crown property or Crown land, that could be a whole mix of things. It could be personal land of the Queen. It could be the Crown Estate. It could be government land. And so they decided essentially to start calling it the Crown Estate in the 1950s. And we're now going to have a look at why this has come about, how it happened. And it started in 1066 with the Norman invasion of England. And this is actually a little picture of the conquest by William, Duke of Normandy. We call him William the Conqueror. And if we go to the next slide, William basically arrived and he took everything. He was an invading monarch and he took the lot, England and Wales. And about 1086, he published a collection of manuscripts, which was a vast amount of work by scribes going out across the country to nearly 13,000 early medieval settlements and finding out who owned what, because he wanted to know what he had to own and what he could give to who. So because he gave a lot of it away, because the church had land holdings, it's a really complex thing. But gradually, the estate, the royal estate or the crown estate, began to get larger, get smaller over the centuries. And so about 700 years went by, and we get to the reign of a monarch called King George III. And this is rather a natty statue of King George at Weymouth. And he inherited the throne in 1760. And at that point in time, the estate that he inherited was relatively reduced. And he did need income. He had a role to play in our nation. But by that time, taxes Parliament was running the country, and we were basically funding ourselves with taxation. And so it was decided to bring the Crown Estate basically to make it the responsibility of the Treasury. And so from that point onwards, the King was given an allowance out of the profits made from the Crown Estate. And that allowance was called the Civil List. And every monarch since George III has basically passed an act. The Civil List Act is passed at the beginning of every monarch's reign. Now, if we could go to the next slide. One of the biggest holdings, I don't know if you noticed, but on that interactive map, there were 243 properties in central London. And so the Crown Estate are the biggest landholders in the West End. And where this is important is that all the income that comes in from the Crown Estate goes straight to the treasury, in other words, to us. And the monarch is then given a proportion of that every year as her income. And since 2011, that's no longer called the civil list, it's called the sovereign fund. And that is used not only to fund all her official activities for her and for other members of the royal family, but also the official residences. And that would not include her personal residence, such as Balmoral or Sandringham. So the income is important, and they are charged, the board of trustees who run the Crown Estate are called the Crown Estate Commissioners, and they are charged with making as much income as they can off the Crown Estate, but within the best management practice possible. And so this is really the heart of their holding, in a sense, because this is like the golden mile of central London. We're in what's called the West End, the great sort of shopping area of London. And this map, unfortunately, is horizontal. It should be, if you imagine it flipped on its side, so that the long bit on the left was at the top. And that is actually Regent Street, which comes down from north to south, and it curves down from Oxford Circus at the top to Piccadilly Circus at the bottom. And then just at the bottom, you can see that on the right of the picture, there's a rectangular development. And that's actually much older. That's called St. James's. And that was developed in the 1660s. So really old. And also for London, very unusual to have a grid development that has actually survived for this long. So we're going to have a little look at Regent Street. And the Crown Estate has done so much work since in the last basically 12 years, since 2002 is when they started doing a project to improve the Regent Street area. And I guide a lot there with a number of Blue Badge tourist guides. We guide in Regent Street and St. James's, and we did a lot of work last year because it was the 200th anniversary of Regent Street, which has a very good claim to being the oldest retail street in the world. Because originally it was actually designed by a man called John Nash in around 1812. And sadly, we've got almost none of his buildings left, but we do have the layout. And for various reasons, it ended up having to go around a curve, and he made it into a most elegant crescent of buildings at the bottom of Regent Street, and then it turns into a straight as it goes further up. And so we still have that shape today, but what you're looking at now is an Edwardian architecture, Edwardian style of architecture, and that was rebuilt in the 1912 around there. So if we go on to the next one, we can see a little bit of what Regent Street looks like today. And one of the things that they've done is brought in a lot more brands. If you see Burberry on the left has its headquarters on Regent Street. And you've got a wonderful picture there on the right that makes me feel quite sentimental at the moment, because obviously we've only just started shopping again today. And you've got all these Union flags going down Regent Street, and it's packed with people. It has absolutely non-stop events throughout the year. And from 1882, they've been turning on the Christmas lights every November. And there are all sorts of events, from Fashion Week to shutting off the street completely to traffic. And the other thing they've done is commissioned a lot of art right across the Crown Estate, actually. Sometimes integrated into buildings, like the piece on the left. And this is a new shopping gallery, a galleria basically, which is covered. And that's called the Quadrant, and it only opened in 2019. And that is a light sculpture going along the roof or the ceiling. And that is actually based on quadrants. The shape of those light sculptures are quadrants. And then on the right, before the Quadrant opened, and they had their tenants in, they allowed pop-ups to come. So this guy is running a pop-up that was actually using recycled plastic and recycled rubber to make interior decoration, basically. So next slide, please. This is Heddon Street. I would call it Heddonism Street, because you've got rather a nice plaque on the left, which is the Crown Property sign. But on the right, if you look at that black plaque on the wall, greatly tidied up, it is a plaque to Ziggy Stardust. So this is really where Ziggy was born, because that famous picture of David Bowie on the front of the Ziggy Stardust album was shot on a dark night in Heddon Street with puddles and just looking really pretty tatty. And the Crown Estate has basically spent a great deal of money and time reinvigorating Heddon Street. And so you've got here a sort of restaurant, pedestrian restaurant area. And the building right at the end is called Heddon House. And on top of that building is the Crown Estate's own beehives. They have their own beekeeper and produce their own honey. Next one, please. And finally, I just want to show you at the top of Regent Street, this is Oxford Circus, one of the most famous shopping junctions in the world. And you can see that there's been the traffic junction has been redesigned so that you can walk across it as opposed to just on the square. And this was done in 2009, and hundreds of thousands of people use this junction every year, and thousands of cars, 2,000 cars an hour go through this. And so when they were designing it, they actually had to deal with all that traffic and all those cars. So a lot of it was digitally tested before they actually did the landscaping. And if anyone's been to Tokyo, you might recognize that it's based on Shibuya, the very famous junction in Tokyo. Now, we're just quickly going to have a look at St. James's, and this is such a good example of how different St. James's is as an area from Regent Street. Regent Street is imperial in scale. It's Edwardian, it's enormous. And you get to St. James's, which is 200 years older originally, and you get these wonderful little tiny shops, which until probably the last 10 years have been very, very male orientated, because men who were ambitious to get along in the world needed to get into St. James's Palace to be near the monarch. And you needed the gear to do it. So you had to have all the clothes and you needed all the equipment. And so a lot of shops catering for men grew up around the area of St. James's. Now, in the last 10 years, the balance has been evened out. There are far more female shops. And if you look at this slide on the left, this is a really good example. Lock & Co, the traditional hatters, who only used to be hatters for men. And you've now got Rachel Trevor Morgan, who's a female milliner and has been there for about 20 years. And on the right, you've got the tea expert at Fortnum and Mason. And Fortnum's is one of our most loved department stores, dates right back to the early 1700s. And that the entrance of Fortnum and Mason gives on to Duke Street, St. James's. And this is what the Crown Estate, this is their biggest development in St. James's over the past few years. And this is called St. James's Market. And there was a market in St. James's before. And if you look right in the middle, you can see there's a curvy building. And if you look just across from that, there's actually some rectangular glass. And that is now the headquarters of the Crown Estate in London. So they have about 400 employees overall, and a large number of them are based here. Right at the bottom of the curvy building, which is another office building and has restaurants and retail underneath, you can see that there's a sort of open corner of the building. We'll just get a close-up of that now, because that is called the pavilion, or the safe deposit. And there were safe deposits. It was very much something that happened in London in the Victorian period, when if you were going away and you needed to store valuables, it was rather like a bank vault, but you could just pay for storage space, and they were quite often underground. So they're based on that, but it's used as the centre of St. James's Market. It's a great public space. We often start tours there, and you can go to exhibitions. What you can see there is a good example of the local shops often put together exhibitions showing their wares and talking about their history. They show Wimbledon there. They show the royal wedding there. Royal events there, and so it's a really good gathering place and a brilliant place to go and watch things on the big screen. So I just wanted to show you a little bit of the street detailing. They've spent a lot of time and money with very good artists to do some of the detailing on the buildings. And then this is something that I wanted to show you because it links back to the quarry that I showed you right at the beginning of this talk. And this is Portland stone that comes out of those quarries I mentioned on the Dorset coast. And you can see that it's full of fossils, and these date back to the Jurassic period, and they're under your feet and in many, many buildings. So look out when you're walking around St. James's and also Regent Street, you will see them. And then finally, I thought that I would end on the pelicans. Now, these are the famous pelicans in St. James's Park. There were 3 of them. There are now 7 of them. And the St. James's Park is not, in fact, technically in the Crown Estate. It's run by the Royal Parks. But it's just near Buckingham Palace, and it's obviously right next to St. James's Palace, which is in fact older. And that makes the perfect lead-in to Danielle, who's going to be talking to you about the changing of the guards, and that takes place exactly here. So over to you, Danielle.
Thank you very much, Sophie. That was excellent. So hello to everyone. My name is Danielle, but most people know me as Dani the Guide, another Blue Badge tourist guide. I'm officially part of the club. And I'm jumping on the bandwagon and do lots of virtual tours thanks to Guide London and their website. They've made that possible. You might remember last month that I took you on a journey discussing curiosities on a previous episode that we did, which is one of my passions of London, those quirky stories. But today I get to talk to you about one of my real core passions is changing the guard and trooping the colour ceremonies. Now, they are both symbolic ceremonies that are associated with the royal family. And I'm going to start with the changing the guard. Now, it is a symbolic ceremony that's about roughly over 360 years old and is performed majoritively by the 7 regiments of the household division, although there are exceptions. And here you can see the Royal Canadian Regiment performing the guard duties at Windsor Castle back in 2018. Now, the Queen can personally invite other British regiments and regiments from the Commonwealth to partake in those duties should she wish to. But the main 5 infantry regiments who are dressed in that beautiful scarlet tunic and bearskin hats are the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, the Scots Guards, the Irish Guards, and the Welsh Guards. And all are distinguishable by their different coloured plumes that are in the side of the hat, so these feathers that you'll see. And they also have different spaces of buttons going down their tunics in order of their seniority. But there's also 2 regiments that are the cavalry, and they are involved in the guarding ceremony too. So you have scarlet tunics on the right-hand side, which are the Life Guards, and those wearing the blue tunics on the left-hand side are the Blues and Royals. And both are wearing silver helmets with brass fittings. And again, you can see each one has a different plume too. So the reason for all of these different coloured plumes dates to 19th century military warfare, whereby your army commander would be sitting way back of the regiments on his horse, and he couldn't exactly tell who was who because you all look the same at the back. And so they developed a plume system so he could command the regiments accordingly in battle. Now, the guard ceremony, the changing the guard, it takes place at Buckingham Palace, the official residence of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, at St James's Palace, at Horse Guards Parade, and 40 kilometres away from the London residences at Windsor Castle, the Queen's preferred and her weekend residence if she's not needed in London for state affairs. And to be honest, whether or not Her Majesty is at residence, the changing the guard ceremony will take place every other day in London, and on the alternate days they're in Windsor. So the soldiers are there to guard this royal estate, the residences. So what exactly is the changing the guard ceremony? Well, it's when 2 regiments are changing over their responsibilities at the royal residences. But there's more action to see than just standing at Buckingham Palace and watching the 2 regiments stare at each other and exchange the official responsibilities. For example, each regiment has their own band. And that's what makes this ceremony extra special, is the music that's accompanied when the soldiers march from place to place. The on-duty regiment is actually split between the 2 palaces in London, Buckingham Palace and St James's Palace. St James's Palace is the older palace and to Buckingham, and therefore senior to it, and is why the regimental colours, so the flag of the regiment, will be kept there. So in reality, the first part of the ceremony starts here at St James's Palace, when the colours will come out and march down to Buckingham Palace. But first, the uniforms of the soldiers are inspected. And you can see where I've circled behind the cavalry band, the soldiers' inspection. Now, when the band comes out, they play for the soldiers. They're not there to play for us, but they are there to play for the soldiers, and they don't necessarily play military music. See, that is Katy Perry's Firework. The bands are well renowned for their ability to play both pop music, band music, military music when the time calls for it. And for example, if we go into the next slide, we'll see half of the regiment do march down towards Buckingham Palace, and they're escorted by military music rather than the pop music. And if you are very much with the right guide who knows the timings like the back of their hand, then you will be very glad to know you'll get a crossover shot. So this is where the infantry are passing the cavalry as they head down to Horse Guards Parade. So Horse Guards Parade is where the cavalry will do a changeover duty, and here it is now, and they guard the official entrance to the royal estate. As you can see here how they're staring at each other much like the infantry would, and here they're changing over on foot in the next slide as well. But going back to the half that were passing the cavalry on the Mall, they will meet their other half at Buckingham Palace. So remember, they're split between St. James's and Buckingham. So once they've met, they will wait for the new guards to emerge from the Wellington barracks, where they too will have been inspected and listen to their bands play. And just like the guards coming from St. James's Palace, the new guards will be escorted by military music. So what you'll notice is that guards there are actually wearing long grey jackets as opposed to the scarlet tunics. And that's because it's their winter uniforms that they wear from October to March. So if you are planning to come to London for the guard change specifically in mind, then you might want to come between March to October when they will be wearing those scarlet tunics. But you'll notice they do still have the bearskin hats. And this is because they were added collectively to the British Army after the 1815 Battle of Waterloo, where the British were fighting Napoleon for the final standoff, the French Emperor, and as a trophy of war, our Grenadier Guards brought back the French bearskin hats. And here you go, they're now part of our integral ceremonial DNA. But once the old regiment and the new regiment meet at Buckingham Palace, what they'll then do is they will change over the first relief of guards, and there's a few more movements that they make. But once all of that is done, the new guard officially on duty will split half between Buckingham Palace, half between St. James's Palace, and they'll send the old guards, now fully formed and off duty, back to the Wellington barracks, as you see here, again accompanied by the band. So let's quickly go on to the trooping of the colour ceremony, because it's these 7 regiments of the Household Division, plus the King's Royal Horse Artillery Regiment, who will actually give a 41 gun salute at Green Park at the Trooping the Colours ceremonial close. So all of these 8 regiments now play a crucial role in the Trooping the Colour ceremony. And it actually has its origins in warfare, where as a part of your daily training and your lineup, you would actually be trooped your colour. So that means showing your flag. So they would show you your flag. And this was because when you're in the midst of battle and you need to rally to your regiment, it may be a bit confusing in that chaos. So they would have a standard raise, so your flag would troop up and you would then rally around it. Now, in terms of the sovereign's birthday, it was first mentioned to be used in 1748 for King George II, but it's only when his grandson, King George III, becomes king in 1760 that it's now ordered to be part of the sovereign's birthday. So the first thing to note is that the Queen Elizabeth II, does actually have 2 birthdays, 21st of April, where she was actually born in 1926, and her official birthday in capacity as Queen, which is every second Saturday of June. Why June? Because the British weather is better in June. Now, the second Saturday of June 2020 has just passed, but because of the pandemic that we find ourselves in, the Trooping the Colour that would annually take place at Horse Guards Parade was cancelled. And so they did a smaller social distance affair at Windsor Castle. Now, traditionally, it is the biggest day in the calendar for British pomp and ceremony, and simply a magical affair to witness. I've done it in both ways, and at the end, I'll quickly run over how you can do that. But what actually happens? Well, each year, one of the household division regiments is chosen to troop their colour. So remember, show them the flag. And they do this before their commander and their colonel-in-chief, the Queen. This year, it was the Welsh Guards that did that at Windsor Castle. But before any of that usually happens, a massive parade takes place down the Mall. And it's a journey from Buckingham Palace to Horsegate's Parade, then the ceremony, and then they come back. This is where you see about 1,400 band members, around 200 cavalry, and around 1,400 foot soldiers who will consequently then be inspected and reviewed by the Queen. But before Her Majesty arrives, 11 a.m. sharp for the ceremony, amongst the parade, you're going to see other members of the royal family and military heads. You can see the Duchess of Cornwall here, the Duchess of Cambridge, and Prince Harry. And here, wearing the Irish Guards uniform on his horse, is Prince William. And if you look very, very closely behind him, you just make out the profile of Princess Anne, the Queen's daughter. And I got these photographs while standing on the Mall waiting for it all to happen, for them to go. And that's how one of the ways you can do it. You just stand there and wait, and it will all be amazing. So when the Queen arrives at 11 a.m., the ceremony starts with her inspection of the regimental guards. And on 36 occasions, the Queen used to ride side saddle in a uniform of the regiment who was chosen to troop the colour that year. But since 1987, she now attends in a carriage instead. And after the inspection, the Queen will head to the main stand and await the soldiers and the bands, who will now manoeuvre in turn to a slow march and then a quick march past her, and then they will salute, and the regiment who will troop their flag will come in front of the Queen to do so. And after all of that is finished, the bands finish with playing the national anthem, and then they escort the Queen back to Buckingham Palace, where the royal family will emerge on the royal balcony. And they will await with their adoring crowds for the red arrows to fly past, which happens at precisely 1 p.m. And once they reach the Mall, that is when the planes release the colours of red, white, and blue, which makes up the United Kingdom's flag. So if you want to go to the Trooping the Colour ceremony, like I said, there is one way to do it. Just stand on the Mall all day and get the good shots of the parade. The other way is to enter a ballot every January and February. They open the ballot for that year, and you can win 2 tickets, currently at a cost of £35 each should you win. And as you can see here, there is a picture of myself. My partner won the ballot 2 years ago, and we went. And all the guards are more than happy to answer questions, take pictures with you, and it really is a phenomenal experience. So officially, happy birthday, Your Majesty.
Thank you very much, Dani. That was fabulous. And indeed, Sophie as well. Really interesting things. And they're both quite kind of intricate, like Trooping the Colour. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on that you know, it has a commentary team when it's shown on the BBC, and they're busy explaining all the details. And it is one of those things that we sort of think we know, but actually it's more complicated than that. And I think the Crown Estate comes into that same category as well. So really good to get them both thoroughly explained. And lots of people in the comments are saying, thank you very much. No questions as such, but
no questions.
Lots of comments, including one. I'm gonna bring up this one from our colleague Pepe here, who's just reiterating the point that it's always good to hire a Blue Badge guide, because we do know exactly where to stand for the best views and exactly what time the Royals, although Dani, as you said, it can be quite a slow, you might have to get there early to get a space, isn't that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but if you do hire a Blue Badge guide for the actual Trooping the Colour day, yes, we do know where to stand if we've done it before, and we know when the Queen will come back. But leading up to that, there's also 2 weeks of reviews, which also can be included as part of the Changing the Guard ceremony if you wish to do that as well.
I have to admit, there's another reason why I Pepe's comment out there, and that's also because it's his birthday, so we can also have
happy birthday, Pepe.
So thank you very much. That's fabulous. Now, we've been talking a little bit about the virtual tours that we're starting to run, and if you're interested in doing those, then the best way to find out more is to have a look on the Guide London website, and we've been showing you this for the last the weeks that we've been doing the broadcast here, but it has changed in the last week or so, because if you now look just under the big blue badge up here on the homepage, you can see London virtual tours, and clicking on that will, let me try it on the screen where it actually is, not the one where it looks like it is. There you go. You can get the virtual tour page. Lots more information there about how to either sort of pick a tour, all sorts of options of choices, and then also how to get in touch with various guides who are waiting. So you can see down the bottom the virtual tour button ticks there, and then you can get in touch with the three of us. So Sophie, I know you're working on tours, but you're kind of prepping, getting going. Is that where you are?
Yeah, I'm just gonna get 5 or 6 ready, and then start doing them, because yep. I'm finding I'm quite slow with the slide technology. So yeah, it's good.
And it is all new technology. And as one of my other colleagues said, what we have to do is build the neighbourhood. So normally the neighbourhood is out there, and we just show you around it. But now we're actually sort of building it in a virtual sense. Dani, you've been doing stuff already, I think, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been doing one specifically for the LGBT community every Monday that I've been doing, and I've got another public one next Tuesday about curiosities of London, so expanding on what I did for Guide London and then Secret London, so really getting off the hidden, the beaten track, etc. So,
fabulous. And that's what I'm doing as well. I've expanded a bit, so I'm the one I've got up and running at the moment is the Lure of the Underground, exploring the underground of London, which I'm doing on Tuesdays. So you can have a look at my profile and then find some more details on there. So thank you both very much. Fabulous talks once again. In the following weeks, we're going to be in these broadcasts, we're going to be sort of focusing a bit more on the virtual tours, at least one day a week. So on Wednesday, we're going to have some little snippets, little samples of a virtual tour. If you're kind of thinking, but hang on, how does that work, and what's it going to be like and things, then tune in on Wednesday and you'll get 3 examples of little bits of tours that you could then maybe join in later on. And on Friday we're talking fashion, so we've got a full fun-packed week ahead on Guide London here. So do come and join us again. And thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you to our 2 fabulous presenters today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.